Hello, I'm Seth Hanasek, and I'm here to talk about the fundamentals of template development using HotDocs Author, which is the newest version of HotDocs, part of HotDocs Advance. This is part 2. If you have not checked out part 1, you should do that before watching this video. In our previous video, we started covering the basic concepts of template authoring using HotDocs Author. We covered the creation of a template, how placeholders work with variables, adding those variables to dialogues to generate an interview, and creating conditional statements to adjust the structure of the document. The next concept we'll discuss is repeated lists. Repeated lists are a way of gathering information from the user when we don't know how many items there might be, and they allow us to format that list in many different ways. As an example, we have here a list of job duties. This is information that we may want to track individually, each responsibility, but we may not know ahead of time how many responsibilities there might be. Perhaps we'll be pulling that information from a database of existing job duties that we want to populate in this list. But again, for each position that's getting filled, we may not know how many items are in that list. So I would like to create a list of job duties. Anytime you're building a list in HotDocs, the first thing you need to do is establish what variables might be needed in that list. In this case, I would like a text variable for a single job duty. And I'll create that now and add the field to the document. But what I would like to do is select this field and repeat it. I'd like to ask it multiple times and then place those multiples of answers in the document and make sure that they're formatted properly. To select a field, if you put your cursor in the field and try to select the text of the field, it's actually quite difficult to select the mechanical parts of the field as well. If you need to select a field, the easiest way to do it is to click the handle, and that will definitely select the whole of the mechanical field as well as none of the surrounding text or characters. In other cases, you may select multiple fields or even plain text. It doesn't really matter what you're selecting. It can contain, as I say, multiple fields. It can be of any length. It can be a single word. It can be multiple paragraphs. The key thing is that whatever text we're selecting is ultimately going to be copied and pasted into the document multiple times. So you want to select whatever text represents one item in the list so that we're going to repeat it. And then we're going to, in the field editor on the right, create a repeated region. When we create a repeated region, we must create a dialog to contain the repeatable variables that we're interested in. So we'll have to create a special dialog called job details, plural. We already have a job details dialog. If you try and create a component that already exists, you will get an error message. It will be in red, so it's nice and visible, and it'll let me know that it's not suitable for this purpose. So this is actually going to be called job duties. And again, HotDocs will notify me if that doesn't exist yet. So we'll create it now. And at the moment, its contents are empty. So what we're going to do is edit the dialog and then add our relevant components, which is the job duty variable. Now, this might be multiple variables, but that's okay. In this case, we only have a single variable. The key difference between this dialog and other regular dialogues that we created in the last session is this repetition setting. So those dialogues, our agreement, employee, and job details dialogues, have this set to none because they're not repeating dialogues. But a repeating dialogue must have its repetition set to a repeating style, and the default is a series. When we test this dialogue, you can see how it looks. It asks for one item in the list, in this case, our first job duty. We can then add another, and it will empty this out. It will increment its number, and it will add another entry in this tree over on the left-hand side. And we can add as many of these duties as might be appropriate. This is particularly useful the series structure when we have multiple variables representing a single list item. So if we're gathering lists of people, and each person has a first name and a surname and an address and an email and a telephone number and a job title, all of those variables together collectively represent a single person. Then having all that information on one screen, filling out the details for the first person and clicking a button makes sense. But here, we're only answering one question, and answering one question and then clicking a button is a little bit clunky. So we have the option of choosing a different repeating style. In this case, we're going to choose a spreadsheet. So when you have a small number of variables, it may be more useful to display the repeat as a spreadsheet. And if I test this, you can see what it looks like. It does indeed look like a spreadsheet with a single row. Each column of the spreadsheet represents a variable. So if it's a small number of variables, anywhere from sort of 1 to 5 is a good range. Then displaying it as a spreadsheet means we can see everything on one screen. If it's more than 5, or if they're very large variables and you have to scroll over to the right to see them all, you may consider using a series instead. In this particular example, a spreadsheet is absolutely perfect. So I can add my first entry, and when I hit enter on my keyboard, it takes me to the next empty row, and I can fill these out as many times as I like. And when I'm done, I can tab out and click the next button or the finish button to move forward through the interview. And I've also have these buttons along the bottom to manipulate the spreadsheet. So I can move rows up and down. I can edit a specific row. If there's multiple variables, I can view that row as a normal dialog by clicking the edit row button. I can insert a blank row in between two rows, or I can add a new one at the bottom. And of course, I can delete an existing row. So if one of these is inappropriate for purpose, then I can delete it. But this is what a spreadsheet repeated dialog looks like. The key thing is that we pick one of the repeating styles. And when we create a dialog from a repeated region field, it automatically sets it to a repeating style. But there are circumstances where you might have to do that manually. In this case, we're fine. Then we click close. And lastly, we can apply a format. Now, in some instances, we wouldn't need to do this if we were creating a numbered or a bulleted list. But in this case, I want the list to appear as punctuated parts of a sentence. So I can choose a list format, and there are some built-in formats, many of which cover most options. But I'm going to choose the first one. And of course, we can write our own using the same rules by typing into this field, just like we can with dates and numbers, etc. And then I'm going to add that field to the document, and it adds a repeat with my dialog and the format noted inside, and an end repeat. And just like an if and an end if, they must appear in pairs, and what's between them gets repeated X number of times, where X is the number of entries in that list. I can test my template, fill in some answers, and check to see how the list is formatted. So when I test the template, I filled in some of the previous answers, but now I'm going to enter my list of job duties. When we enter our details, if there's not enough room to view all the text, HotDocs will establish a sort of minimum or default width for these columns. You can move your mouse over the edge of the column and drag it to make it larger so we can see all of the text that we're typing. So we can fill in our list and then check preview of the output to make sure that it is putting the commas in the right place. So it lists our first requirement, our first job duty with a comma, our second, and then an and separating the final two. And I can go back in the interview, and regardless of how many items I put in this list, formatting will update itself so that the last two options are separated with an and all the previous ones are separated with commas. We can use these repeat statements to build bulleted lists. Numbered lists, the key thing is to simply make sure that your item that you're repeating, for instance, this list of job duties, is in a paragraph that is formatted with a number, and then you select the variable field as well as its final paragraph mark, which includes the numbering or bullet formatting, and then create the repeated region based on that whole paragraph. And you don't need to apply a list format because each item gets its own line. And when we test assemble this, we can see the bullets get added, or the numbering rather gets added based on the number of items in the list. If I load the last list that I filled in, here's my list that I've already typed in a saved set of answers. I can go to a preview, and it will put each item in its own numbered line. We can use the same technique to produce bulleted lists. We can also create expanding tables of information. Repeated lists are very flexible. We can also nest them so you can have repeats of lists inside repeats of lists. So you can have a list of people, and then each person can have a list of children, or you can have a list of companies, and each company can have a list of directors. We can use lists as many times as we like throughout a document, and they can be formatted slightly differently each time. So they're a very flexible tool, very, very useful in lots of circumstances. So all of these things that we've discussed so far, the construction, the templates, the interactions of the variables, the behavior of the dialogues and the interviews, the conditions themselves, the way repeats are used, all of those can be controlled and expanded and extended using HotDocs scripting. HotDocs has a very, very powerful scripting language built into it that lets us extend the functionality of HotDocs to near infinite lengths. If there's anything that HotDocs can't accomplish using its basic construction principles, then it can almost certainly be accomplished using a combination of those things along with some scripting. And scripting can run the gamut from very, very simple mathematical calculations all the way up to complex interview behaviors and assembly rules, depending on what's necessary in your specific templates or documents. A common example of scripting is to do basic calculations, mathematical calculations. So we've got here the monthly salary, and I'm already asking a question about the value of the annual salary. So someone is entering that information, but I would like to calculate the monthly salary based on the annual salary. So I'm going to add a placeholder, but instead of choosing a variable type, I'm actually going to choose a computation so we can add computed values. And a computation exists in the component file just like a variable that you built, so it's reusable and it has a name. So we give the computation a name. In this case, it's going to be called the monthly salary. If we wanted to, we could select other expression and create exactly the same script, but it would simply exist in that field and nowhere else. So we can create throwaway scripts, one-time use scripts using the other expression placeholder. But we're going to create a computation so that we can use this in other places if we need to. Now the scripting model is accessed through this computation editor. And we have a main script window, which is this large open area in the middle. And then on the right-hand side, we have a list of all the building blocks that we can use to create our script. There are a series of models that give us access to the full gamut of HotDocs behaviors, lots and lots of different types of interactions with the answers the user is giving and calculations or transformations that we can make on them. We can manipulate text. We can create complex logical structures for those conditions. We can do complicated mathematical functions. We can change dates and calculate new dates, but we can also do basic arithmetic. So I'm going to take, in this components list, I'm going to take the annual salary, which is here, and drag it and drop it into my script window. Now, when we're editing scripts, the script editor is syntax aware. So as we're entering things, it's checking to see if it understands what we're adding. So variables will appear in blue. Other components will appear in different colors. Keywords, HotDocs internal keywords will be bold, etc. And we get this squiggly red line, which looks a bit like the spell checker in Word, but this is actually the syntax checker for scripts. And if you see a red line like that, there is some sort of error that HotDocs is registering. And you can mouse over that line and it will pop up a message explaining what the problem is. So HotDocs can work with any of its known types of information. We can use computations to compute text values or date values or numbers or true-false values. Right here it says it found a number expression where a text expression was expected. So we're going to be working with numbers. We need to make sure the computation knows that by changing the result type to a number. So this is going to output a number. And now it knows what annual salary means and what to do with it. In this case, we're going to take the annual salary and we are going to divide it by 12, which should produce the monthly salary for us. But we can also test this and make sure that it's calculating the way that we expect. So it will ask us the relevant question. In this case, it wants the annual salary, which happens to be on the job details dialog, so it asks the whole dialog. But right now we're just testing the annual salary, so I can, or the monthly salary rather, so I can fill in the annual salary. And if I put in, say, 36,000, I can go to the tab at the top that reads result. I can check to make sure it's outputting the number that I expect and that looks correct. But it doesn't look like currency. I want to make sure this outputs like a currency amount. So I can go into its behavior and set a format. Like we did with our number variables, we can set the format of the output to a currency format so that when it calculates this number, it always outputs as a currency. And then we add that field to the document, just like we do with normal variables, except this won't trigger anything being asked. It will simply get the salary, the annual salary answer, and calculate the new value and place it in the document. We can also use scripting to do more complex conditions than we might normally need. In our previous example of conditions, we're checking the value of the annual salary. But I would like this to also check that the annual salary has been answered. I would also like to set an upper limit. So I want to set a range that has a low end and a high end rather than just a cutoff line. In this case, the condition type is not going to be based on a number variable. It is going to be based on a computation or an expression. If you choose expression, then this expression, this script will only exist for this one if statement. And in this case, that's what I want. But if I wanted it to be reusable, I could also create a computation to do the same job. But in either case, in the case of the expression, I can click on this ellipsis button here to open the script editor or the expression editor, which provides the same tools as the computation editor because it's the same scripting language. And I can add my extra conditions. So first, I want to check to see if annual salary is answered. And I can go into the models and find the model that I want and drag it and drop it into the window, and it will give me red placeholders where it needs information. In this case, it needs a variable or a dialog. I can also type into the scripting window. And if I hold down the control key and press the space bar, it will auto-complete those instructions for me. So you can use a combination of dragging and dropping and typing to fill in the script completely. And we can string together our logical expression so I can check to see if annual salary is answered and that annual salary is greater than or equal to 45,000 and annual salary is less than or equal to 1,000,000. So I can check all three of these things, and all of them must be true for the paragraph to be added. As soon as one of them is false, it's not. So we can build up these expressions to be as complex as we need and check whatever conditions we need. We can check other variables. We can make them interdependent. We can bring to bear the full power of the HotDocs scripting language to produce any business rule that we might possibly conceive of. Scripting can also be used to change the behavior of dialogues. It can be used to change the flow and behavior of the interview itself. It can address a number of different issues like pulling in external content firing off extra assemblies. It's very, very powerful. And there are very few tasks that the scripting language can't handle. So it's a massively powerful set of tools that are available right away. And it can be as simple or as complex as you might need. Once we've set up a template using all of these components and all of these elements, we can start looking at the larger structure of all of our templates. And we can start to think about extracting some useful information for reuse in other places as auxiliary templates. So an auxiliary template is an extra template that is itself just a HotDocs template. It's not mechanically any different than a regular one, except it has a little note inside of its component file that says, I'm an auxiliary template, not a regular template. But you can use all of the above functions. We can use conditions and variables. We can create dialogues, repeated lists. We can use scripting. But that auxiliary template can be inserted into the content or the body of a main template, and it can be done in lots of different places. So we can reuse certain pieces of text and maintain them in a single spot. If, for example, the segment on the initial term is actually going to be used in a number of different employment contracts because the wording is always the same, we can actually select this text, and we want to include the if statements because they're part of those clauses. And we can add a placeholder for an auxiliary template. So if we select a block of text and add a placeholder, it will allow us to create an auxiliary template. We need to give this template a file name, and we can call it term clause. It'll let us know that this template doesn't exist yet. When I create it, it will copy the selected text into a new template with its own component file that is actually copying the components from this, or sharing the components from this template's component file. And then I need to add the field. When I do that, it will replace that text with this notation that says, get the contents of the term clause template, copy it, and paste it here. And I can edit the template by clicking on this edit button. And you'll see it places the content in its own template, which can be edited separately. I can add placeholders. I can modify the placeholders that are there. I can do additional authoring, but it's sharing the same component set as its parent, as this template behind it. So if I add a new question here, it will be available in its parent. We can build a library of these auxiliary templates and add them to any other templates using this auxiliary template placeholder. When we add a placeholder for an auxiliary template, it simply lets us select from existing templates that are in the workspace. And if I go to the workspace, even though you can't see them, our auxiliary templates live inside the workspace along with the parent or main templates. They're just filtered out, but we can add them. We can tick the box to include auxiliary templates, and it'll show us all the auxiliary templates here. When a template has an auxiliary template inside of it, it's listed in the workspace over here under its properties. And by extension, auxiliary templates will list all of the main templates that they appear in. So we can track the relationships between the auxiliary and the main templates. In most cases, we won't work with the auxiliary templates directly, so you can hide them from the main workspace. When this template is eventually published, it will package any auxiliary templates along with it and publish them at the same time, so that everything that this template needs to assemble will also get published. We can create as many of these auxiliary templates as we like, and we can do it by selecting content inside templates and adding auxiliary template placeholders. But we can also simply create the templates normally, just like we did for the main templates. And then we can, in their properties, simply tick the box that says that they are auxiliary templates if we want to filter them out of the main list. But any template can act as an auxiliary template. And if that template itself can also be produced as a main template, then it can fulfill both roles. depending on how the auxiliary template placeholder is used in the document. So this covers all of the basic concepts that anyone needs to know in order to automate any template that they might ever come across. There is, of course, a lot of detail to be found through practice because HotDocs is immensely powerful and there's lots and lots of things it can do. Pretty much everything that can be done can be broken into one of these categories. There's a lot of depth to each of them. There are many, many settings and features that I haven't been able to cover in this session. But if you'd like to learn more, you can contact us at our website at abacusnext.com, or you can email us at hdinfo@abacusnext.com. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope this has been useful to you.